on another Lord's Day. Appreciate all the prayers that have been led, and especially for the very good singing today. It's very encouraging and uplifting, and it's always very helpful to go into a sermon with singing like that. Today, we are continuing through our Matthew study. We haven't finished chapter 9 technically, but we've already gone through some sermon material closing out chapter 9, and we're going to move ahead into chapter 10 with our sermon today titled, We Go Fishing. Now, if you remember that in Matthew chapter 4, verse 19, Jesus said to those that he called, and he's calling Peter and Andrew, James and John, they're out fishing, and he calls them from their fishing vessels and encourages them to follow him. And in doing so, he saith unto them, Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Chapter 9 closed with Jesus making the statement, looking at the multitude, having compassion upon them as sheep being scattered without a shepherd. And he says to his disciples, Pray that the Father of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers, and that because the harvest truly is plenteous. So Matthew 9, Jesus says, pray for laborers. Laborers that will work like I do. And in going through our Matthew study, we should be picking up very quickly that Jesus was a very busy individual. From chapter 8, coming down from the mountain, immediately met with somebody that had a problem, to the next problem, to the next problem. And even as we find ourselves in Matthew chapter 9, he's in Matthew's house, and while he's in Matthew's house, somebody else is going to come with a problem. And Jesus was ready to go. That, in fact, he is setting forth the example. Jesus is showing what it takes, what's required. And again, we have leadership in its proper place that he is, in fact, going about and exemplifying the kind of work that's to be done. He is practicing what he is preaching, setting the example for his apostles and setting the example for us today. So we will study this morning, or as we're planning to study this morning, just how busy Jesus was. And if you're doing your own personal reading, you realize how busy Jesus was. He says to these individuals, pray, but then in this chapter 10, it starts by him selecting. He pulls the 12 to the side and he says, all right, you've prayed for God, for the Father to send laborers. Well, guess what? He's answered your prayers. You are going out. And we made mention of the fact that most of the times we will look at this in standpoint and say, well, yeah, we're praying that God will send somebody else. When in reality, if we're going to make that prayer and to make that plea that yes, the harvest is plenteous, we need to go out and send forth reapers. We need to look at ourselves first. And in viewing the fact that Jesus sends these individuals out, Matthew chapter 10, verses 1 through 4 is what we're going to look at today for our sermon. And when he had called unto him his 12 disciples, he gave them power against unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal all manner of sickness and all manner of disease. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these. The first, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, and Matthew the publican, James the son of Alphaeus, and Labius, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. With this selection, we can view the wisdom of God at its finest. And that contrasted to the wisdom of men. Now, in going through this section, oftentimes this is the section where we'll make our children memorize these names. Go through and memorize these 12 individuals, and they're the 12 apostles. But we are in the shadows of Jesus just saying to the Pharisees, go and learn what this means. That as we are going through this, we do not need to simply view it as being, well, it's just another list of names. That in fact, if we will take the time and to consider who's being called, we can find that there are some vital lessons to be taken in the calling of these 12 individuals. And for us to take an encouraging lesson as we're set out to do the work. They were sent out to be laborers, to be fishers of men. We're sent out to be laborers and fishers of men. How should I view myself in that work? But not only for us that are members of the Lord's church, but as we are streaming this for those that are not members of the Lord's church, it is an encouraging factor for those that would be lost out in the world to consider. Well, why would the Church of Christ want me? All of that is encapsulated in the calling of these individuals. So consider this. Number one, with those that were called to be apostles, not a single one had any worldly prominence. They had no worldly rank that put them into any special place in society. You have fishermen. You have a publican. You have a political reformist. Can we believe that Jesus selecting a tax collector that is despised and rejected, these common folk, and they're the ones that are going to change the world? That's our first lesson. What we learn in picking these men. What does it take to change the world? It doesn't take some great somebody. All you need are individuals pure of heart, taking on the attitudes of the Beatitudes, willing to follow Christ, willing to do the work. And if you just consider the kind of people all throughout Israel's history that God chose to be leaders, even when you consider Moses, some might look at Moses and say, well, Moses was pretty up there politically. He lived in Pharaoh's house. He was reared up and brought up in all of the wisdom of Egypt. And that's true. But when did God actually choose Moses for a leader? While he was in Pharaoh's house? Or while he was out there watching sheep? When God is choosing leaders, He is choosing those that are individuals that are going to appreciate the position. You take, for example, King Saul. Though Saul did not start out or did not end in a good way, when he started out, he was the best kind of candidate. When he found out he was chosen, he looked at himself and he said, why would you choose me? When it came to the families of Israel, he came from the smallest tribe, the smallest family inside of the tribe. And even as it was in his physical stature, he was not anything to marvel at, to be in awe over. And he looked at himself and he saw himself as being a little person. And God said, that's the man that I want. And even when it came time for his inauguration, for him to be anointed as king, he was hiding. Oftentimes when it comes to a person who's rushing towards leadership, yeah, put me in charge, put me at the front. Oftentimes that's not the one that you're wanting to go with. But that in fact you're wanting to go here. Here are these common folk. They know about authority. They know about rules and regulations. They know how vital it is to follow these rules. And you put them in charge of others. They come from a lowly position. And so they will not abuse their power. Jesus did not need the things the world deems necessary in touching and changing the lives of the world. And just considering the fact of a publican, once again, we talked about Matthew a great deal in our Bible class. How will Jesus accomplish his mission with Matthew? That is the power that Christ had to change people's lives. That you would take, how is he going to change the world with fishermen? And even the Bible acknowledges that these were, when it comes to intellect, earthly wisdom, they were not smart individuals. Acts chapter 4 and verse 13. Peter and John are brought before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court. Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived, notice here, that they were unlearned and ignorant men, but yet they marveled, and they took knowledge of them that they had been with Jesus. How are you supposed to make any type of difference with unlearned and ignorant men? When it comes to worldly things, we may not be that smart, but when it comes to the things of Christ and what He has taught, that's where the influence comes in. That's where the power comes in. Jesus did not need the Pharisees, Sadducees, the scribes to change people. He took the common man and raised him up to be the prime example of what religion, the kingdom, and Christianity is supposed to be. You take into consideration, when Nicodemus showed up, Jesus did not start thinking to himself, now, you know, old Nicky here, he's got some influence. Nicodemus has got some pull. He's got some position. He's got some preeminence. To where if I could get hooked up with Nicodemus here, he could start giving me an in with the Pharisees. Nicodemus could really help us go a long way. But when we stop and we consider what Jesus was trying to do, that Jesus is coming in and He's trying to convert, restore the entire system. The position of Nicodemus is not a plus, it's a negative. The position of Nicodemus is actually a liability to the work and to the cause. Why? Because you start putting Nicodemus in a position where he's got to choose between following Christ and keeping his position. Which one do you think will be sacrificed? I mean, we see it today. How many people will sacrifice standing up for what's right just so as to keep from getting on the wrong side of people? Oh, Jesus, I have too many connections to get pulled into this. I mean, can we not actually see that being the position as we are in the midst of making change in this area? That we would try to go to those that are in power and that have position and have them make a stand for what's right, but then what comes into play? Well, I got to think about my constituency. I've got to think about those that are voting for me. And they won't make the right stand. So what does Jesus do? Jesus goes to people that are not able to be pulled away. That are not able to be led astray by the crowd because they're not with the crowd. And so with this choosing, He looks at a Nicodemus and says, Nicodemus, you need to change too. And instead of taking the mighty and the powerful, He chose the lowly and unpresuming. And most of the world thinks, and not even just the world, when we think about this from the aspect of our brotherhood, members of the Lord's church, churches of Christ, what do they think that you need in order to be successful? In order to get the job done? Well, you need a Tim Tebow. Somebody with influence. Name recognition. So as to get the job done. or a Mike Schmitz or a Joel Osteen, and they're pleasant to the eye, and they're charismatic and able to draw a crowd. But even as we're considering this point and we're thinking about who Jesus chose, fishermen? Think about your average fisherman. Not too appealing. Not too inviting. Hands are rough. They're rough. Skin probably all leathery from being out in the sun. And smell like fish from being around fish all day. That's who you're choosing to be your face? To be what it is that the people see for your work? Well, yeah, that's right. That's the common man. And even as we consider, what does the Bible, this rhetorical question, what does the Bible say about how Jesus would look? Is it a presentation like this? No. In fact, Isaiah prophesied and said, "For he shall grow before him as a tender plant and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness. And when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him." Jesus was nothing special. He was no Absalom, long flowing locks that when he came through town, you just swooned. He looked just like everybody else. Why? Because it's not about the personality. It's not about what you're able to see on the outside. Because on the outside, this is favorable. This is nice to look at. But what about what's being presented? And even with this, who's your target audience? Who else are you trying to appeal to? Well, you're trying to appeal to people that look like this. So when considering this, what this also does, the choosing of these men for the apostleship, sitting and judging over the affairs of the church, choosing these type of characters removes the excuse of having to be a Nicodemus to do the work. Choosing these men to be fishermen opens it up for the possibility for anyone to be a fisherman. You look at these situations and you look at these events and it's like, well, I'm no Tim Tebow. So I'm not cut out for this. That's not an excuse when you actually look at the real examples. The real example is Christ. And he was born into poverty. He did not grow up in Jerusalem where all the politics and religious elite were. He grew up in Nazareth. He lived in Capernaum. Poor places. Why? Because that's the kind of leadership that's being established. So when it comes to us and the work that's being set for us to do, Jesus does away with this excuse by calling your everyday salt of the earth, average Joes, to go and do his work. There is no reason for anyone to look at themselves and say, well, I'm not like so-and-so, so what can I do? Right here, when you start having those ideas and you start thinking that way, right here is where you go. If these unlearned and ignorant men could turn the world upside down, then what can a couple of cabinet makers do? What can an electrician do? All of us are able to make a difference. And you're not having to have yourself set up and be something that is unrealistic. These individuals are in the top 1%. And if we start looking at the top 1% as those that are able to do the work, we're cutting out a huge portion of our workforce. So is it any wonder the work of the church is not being done? Why? Because our brotherhood have this mentality. Well, the preacher is somebody special, that he's able to do this work. So you put the majority of the work on one person. How's that going to go? Not great. So in fact, Jesus is flipping the script once again. He's turning our idea of what success looks like upside down. To where they would say, well, if you're going to get anything done, it's got to look a certain way. You got to have a certain presentation, have a certain type of building. If you're going to do a broadcast, you've got to have a fancy studio. You can't do it in a spare room that's upstairs in your house, which is what we're doing, by the way. They would look at that and say, how do you expect to get anything accomplished? Look at what Jesus did with a few fishermen, a tax collector. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'll just go ahead and say it, a political anarchist. And all the people that they helped. And the reason for this is because, leading into point number 2, the power is in the message, not the messenger. Now, I understand that when we're doing things, we want it to look nice. We want to have a professional presentation. But at the same time, we're not needing to get so wrapped up in that to where we think, unless we have something that's so top tier, that we cannot do anything at all. I mean, the very fact that we do not have a building of our own, that we're here renting, with many brethren, just that fact alone would hinder them from even going out and trying to do something. But that's not the case here. And once we realize just how great the message is, and that that's what the important thing is, and that's what it is that's changing people, then we will take that conqueror mentality. That we will go out and wage war against the power of darkness. Because look at what Jesus did when he was alive. He can do it with them, he can do it with us. We're just short of 12. But even with that, if he can do it with 12, we can do it with 9. Because as we said, the power is in the message. Today, we place too much emphasis on the messenger. You just consider, look at who it is that our brotherhood wants to use. Look at the lectureships. Polishing the pulpit. GBN, who's on there? Men that speak well, that are appealing to the eye. But while you're too busy looking at them, are you paying attention to what they're even saying? Are they presenting the message? Are they presenting the truth as it needs to be presented? This idea that we have about, well, it's about the messenger. It's about who you put up in front. This idea has caused and will continue to cause more and more problems for churches and for preachers. Because we get fixated on personality. We have congregations of the Lord's church that when they go out and they start looking for a preacher, for an evangelist, well, he must look a certain way. He has to look a certain way, has to sound a certain way, his family must look a certain way, he has to go to such and such school, has to have these kinds of degrees. And yet there's nothing that's ever stated about being scriptural. Well, what does he actually preach? Does he preach the truth? He might be from the backwoods of Alabama, to where he don't talk so good. But is his presentation sound? Will he tell you the truth? Will he help you to get to heaven? And if so, that's the man that you need. With most of these individuals and their degrees and their alliances to all these different institutions that they have, they end up being in a position like a Nicodemus. Their accreditation and their degrees and their connection makes them more of a liability. Oh, well, I can't preach this because it'll put me at odds with so-and-so back at school. Or I can't say this, I can't present this, because if I do, then I can't get on this person's gospel meeting. We look at these things as being, well, that's what's going to give us the advantage. No, it ends up being a hindrance. Not only will they present the truth, but just as we've also discussed in leading up to this chapter, about what it takes to do the work effectively. What it takes to go out and to labor like Jesus did is that you must see the people the way Jesus did. With compassion, sheep scattered with no shepherd. So when it comes to choosing the man or an individual to come and help, to lead you and to guide you, instead of being fixated on what he looks like and what he sounds like, you should be asking the question, will he see the lost people the way Jesus did? Not only will he see the lost people the way Jesus did, will he see us the way Jesus would see us? With compassion, in need of help, and trying to get to heaven. So if the power is in the message and not the messenger, just how powerful is it? That can be seen by who's selected. Let's go through the list again. Now, the names of the 12 apostles are these. The first, Simon, who's called Peter, Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, John, his brother, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the publican, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Labius, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. Now, we have some terms of description that are added in this text that are not added about anybody else. If you notice, nothing is said about Peter or Andrew's occupation. It doesn't say Peter and Andrew, the fishermen. It doesn't say James, John, the fishermen. But when we get to Matthew, you have the publican. And then also when we get to Simon, you have the Canaanite. Now, why is that important? As we said, we're trying to prove how powerful is the message. And this is the evidence. We've already discussed Matthew was a publican, either serving Herod or directly serving Rome. Either way, in the eyes of a Jew, that's not a place where you want to be. Herod is a maniac and goes on a killing spree. And of course, Rome is their captive, or their captors. He has, in a way, submitted himself to Roman rule. All right? You're in charge. And in fact, you're so much in charge, I'll even go out and gather your money for you. When we get to Simon, the Canaanite, looking at Matthew's account, that might not be any type of significance. But when we're looking at what the word Canaanite, our English word for Canaanite coming from in the Greek word, actually has this connection in Luke chapter 6 and verse 15. Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon called Zelotes. You have Simon the Zealot. This is a political class that rose up within the nation of Israel, that they were ready to overthrow Rome any way that they could. They were so Jewish and so nationalistic that this Simon was ready to die in order to overthrow the Roman government. Josephus writes about them, and other historians during that time frame write about this group as well. Oftentimes the Pharisees are viewed as being the top tier, but really if you want to get down to it, the Pharisees weren't willing to die for their position. But Simon was. How in the world could these two possibly work together? Here's Matthew, and he's in submission to the Roman government, and here is Simon, and he's saying down with the Roman government, which would include Matthew. In Simon's eyes, Matthew should die because he's a traitor. What could bring them together? The gospel could. That both of these individuals, Matthew, a publican, connected to the government, but yet when he is called, it says he left his table, he left everything behind, and he followed Christ. To where when Simon is called, what would he do? He would have to do the same as Matthew in order to work together. These individuals were able to work together because they both came to Christ, leaving behind their former beliefs. And that's what it's going to take today. That we might have certain beliefs and we might have certain ideas. But if we're actually wanting to get something done, and that for the cause of Christianity, you know what? I might have to change parties. And I might have to turn my back on a particular party. This right here shows the power of the gospel and the power that Christ had. I can understand how Simon would be appealed by it because if you get down to it, Jesus did come to overthrow Rome. Not in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense. Jesus came to win the Roman hearts just as much as he came to win the Jewish hearts. Winning their minds. Okay, Simon, if you really want to change things politically, come with me. And we will not just change law. We will change people's hearts. And that really is the key. If we're wanting to see anything change in our community, like what we're trying to do with this new casino situation, you know what we're going to have to do? We can't just have the city of Polson make a decision. We have to change people's minds on how they think about a casino, how they think about gambling. We want to change the divorce rate. We can't just make laws about it. We have to change people's minds about what God says about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. If we want to have proper law and governance about abortion, we cannot just let the Supreme Court come in and make a decision and think, oh, that's going to make everything better, because we can see that it's not. You can't just go out and make new laws. You have to change people's beliefs about a thing. Now, most people would say that's impossible, but we see right here in the calling of the apostles, it's not impossible. Simon changed his mind, he changed his beliefs. Matthew changed his. And they both gave up those things so as to follow Christ. Change their attitudes, and they are able to work together. They did not come to Christ while trying to hold on to things which Christ did not teach. Simon, you can't come in here with some of your ideas. If you're going to come in here, you're going to let those go. All right, that's fine. I can do that because what you're trying to do, it's the same thing that I want, but it's a better way. The only way, so as we're looking at this from this standpoint and we're considering what it is that we're trying to do for this community, not only for the community just from a social standpoint, but for a religious standpoint. The only way for those in man-made churches to come to Christ and to be able to work together with us and have unity is that they have to come to Christ completely. Leaving behind the traditions of men. Many people would look at us and would question, well, why won't you work with anybody? Because we're not in agreement. Can two walk together except they be agreed? And even in the Old Testament, God gave a command that you do not hook a mule and an ox together. One, that's for the protection of the animal, but then two, those two animals don't work together. So for the Lord's church to try to get together with a denomination and, hey, let's go out and get this done, you're hooking a mule with an ox. And that doesn't work. Either you're going to be a mule, it needs to be mule, or ox, ox. Can't be this division. And so we see it here being exemplified. Whoa. The division that was normally there was in fact taken away. And that's simply by what it was that Jesus came to present. That in fact he showed them a better way to bring about revolution. And if we would simply follow this pattern, how much better off we would be. In the world in which we live today, when it really comes to getting the job done, it's not going to be the big congregations with 400, 500 people. It's going to be small groups like this. And in the beginning stages of the churches of Christ in this nation, in this country, it was small, little, backwood congregations that ended up having the greatest effect. That to be small, there's nothing wrong with that. And that in many ways, that's what God wants. It's what He prefers. Because a small group getting something great done, what will they do? They'll honor God. But a larger group, a bigger group that goes out and does the work, what will they do? Well, it was our man force. It was our manpower. They got the thing accomplished. Do not just simply think that just because we've gone through this chapter, we know these names, and that we're comfortable with them, that we know everything there is to know about what's being presented. Go back and learn what this means. In John chapter 17, verse 20 and 21, as we're thinking about this plea for unity and how it's possible. How were these two men brought together? Jesus, before he was crucified, was praying, "Neither pray I for these alone, but for them also which shall believe on me through their word, that they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. Many today would say that this is not possible. This prayer for unity, for us to be one, to be together, to work in unison, that others would be able to see us working in unity and they also be saved. Many in the world look and they question as to why church and religion, why can't we have this? Why can't we work together? And it's because there's going to be somebody that's got something they're not willing to give up. Simon and Matthew could work together because they both gave up something. And when it comes to following Christ, it takes sacrifice. If Jesus was able to change these two men's way of thinking, and they are polar opposites to each other, then why can he not do it today? He can. He can, and it's with the gospel. He even mentions it right here. Neither pray I for these alone, but for them also which shall believe on me, notice, through their word. How is this unity possible? Through the word. Through the gospel. Taking God at his word and being obedient. Just doing what he says. Not putting my own thoughts, not putting my own interpretations, not putting my own considerations as to how things should be done. But that in fact, if we are wanting to save the lost, if we're wanting to be fishers of men, this is the means of doing it. Jesus is the master teacher. There's no better teacher than him. So why not follow his example? And how'd he do it? He did it without modern technology, did it without PowerPoint, did it without slides, without animation, without having a B-roll, without having a soundtrack in the back. He just went out and presented the word. So as we conclude and we consider, after Jesus died and as his apostles went out to do the work, there's further admonition that shows just how simple this really is. To change the world. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation, to every one that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. The power is not in the messenger. Paul himself puts himself to the side and says the power is in the gospel. It is in the message. And again, notice how powerful it is. This message is so powerful that it is salvation unto everyone that believes. Notice, Jew and Greek. The clean and the unclean. The holy and the unholy. This gospel message is for all. Every race, every ethnicity, every background that you could possibly think of. This gospel is for everyone. Well, you'll never get this group because they'll never get along with this group. If they come to Christ and they obey the gospel, they'll get along. Because you know what? They'll drop those prejudices. They'll let those things go. But if they're not willing to let those things go and drop those prejudices, well, guess what? They won't come to Christ. Paul would even say later on in Romans chapter 10, we're still in the same chapter, it's the power of God and salvation unto all them that believe. Well, notice what Paul states here in Romans chapter 10 and verse 12. Yes, the gospel is powerful, but how powerful is anything if you just leave it sitting there on a table? Dynamite is powerful, but only if you light it and put it somewhere. A jackhammer is powerful, but not if you leave it leaned up against a wall. For there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek. There we are once again. Helping everybody. For the same Lord over all is rich unto all that call upon him. For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? Just because the power is in the message and not the messenger does not then mean, well, okay, we can get rid of the messenger. Oh no, you still need the messenger. But we might need to change our perspective on who qualifies as a messenger. Everyone is able to be a messenger. If we want people to call on him, if we want people to believe, then somebody has got to take the power out. And how shall they preach except they be sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of them that preach the gospel of peace and bring glad tidings of good things. Verse 16, but they have not all obeyed the gospel. The power's in the message. And somebody has to take it out. But in taking it out, somebody's got to obey it. There must be obedience to what has been taught. What does that mean? That means that in order for me to be obedient in being a Jew, I have to let some things go. Circumcision. Gotta let that go. For a Gentile, idolatry. You gotta let that go. For those in the religious world around us, mechanical instruments and music. You want to obey the gospel, you got to let that go. One-man pastor system. Women teachers, women preachers, women elders. You want to obey the gospel of Christ, you're going to have to let that go. Well, here are my political views. I think the woman has the right to choose. You're going to have to let that go if you're going to obey the gospel. Isaiah saith, Lord, who hath believed our report? Verse 17, so then faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. For anyone that does want to be obedient to the gospel, that in fact wants to call upon the name of the Lord so as to be saved. Here we are, Romans chapter 6. Romans 6 comes before Romans chapter 10. And again, Paul emphasizes the fact, but God be thanked that you were the servants of sin, but you have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered you. Once again, we have in Paul's letter the need for obedience. That is from the heart, but that you are following, you are obeying a form or a pattern of doctrine. There are certain things you have to believe. And if you do not believe those things, you need to start believing them. If you have beliefs that go against this form, that go against this pattern, that go against this model, you need to let them go. Well, who are these individuals that have called upon the name of the Lord so as to be saved? Who are those that have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine? Know ye not that so many of us as were baptized into Jesus Christ, were baptized into his death? Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. So many people are not willing to obey from the heart that form of doctrine because they believe that they can be saved without baptism. And they would try to give the idea, well, you folks in the Church of Christ, you can have your view, a person must be baptized, and we'll have our view that you don't have to be baptized, and we'll walk together in unity. Jesus said that's impossible. As we have seen with the example of Matthew and Simon, unless you're willing to give everything up that goes against what Jesus says, you're not going to come together. For a person to obey from the heart that form of doctrine, this is included. And anybody that believes differently than what the Word teaches, we can't be together. I want us to be together, but this is what it takes. Will you be a Matthew? Will you be a Simon? That you will lay aside your personal beliefs and your own understanding and obey what it is that God has said. And for us that are members of the Lord's body and looking at this information and relearning this, let us always be encouraged. Let us be edified to remember, just as Paul wrote, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 23, and those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon these we bestow more abundant honor. And our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness. For our comely parts have no need, but God hath tempered the body together, having given more abundant honor to that part which lacked, that there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. Let us not forget our great example, which is Christ, and what his background was. He was a poor man from Galilee. And he, with the help of 12 other poor men, and we're still talking about them today, 2,000 years later, and we are still talking about these fishermen, the publican, and the zealot. Let us as members of the body never think ourselves too small for the work, that we are too insignificant, and that we will always be ready. As we prepare to sing the song of invitation, if anybody has any need, we ask that you come as we stand and sing together.